devoted to creativity and aesthetics. He has written and edited more than 30 books, and which is Creativity 101, Cambridge Handbook of Creativity, and all that. And he has won numerous awards, including the Lawrence Award, Berlin and Hans Award, and so on. And Lamies is also co-presenting with him. She is her student, and her dissertation is on creative problem solving and engineering. So please welcome.
So I'm going to start a little bit with some more general stuff about creativity. Lamies is going to chime in about relating to engineering, and then I'll end with a few kind of broad tips. So the first question is just, what is creativity? How do you define it? And one way that you can tell that people are writing about creativity but not doing the lit review is when they say that nobody agrees in the definition. Whereas, in fact, even though it's a very nebulous concept, there's quite striking agreement about how somebody would define creativity. So, if you ask, what is creativity, the first thing people will say is, okay, it's something new, it's different, original, thinking outside the box, innovative, and yes. But let's say that you hired somebody to pave your driveway, and you said you wanted a creative job, and they use day-old salami. This is new. Nobody else on your street, probably your state, will have a driveway filled with rotting salami. But it's not getting the job. And in creativity research, we would argue this isn't creative, that yes, it's novel, it is original, but it's missing the second component, which is that it's not enough to be new. It has to be new and appropriate to the task. And this is where a lot of times people tend to think that creativity means just being wacky or wild or off the wall. But it's not necessarily. It depends on what you're being creative in. And there are some things where task appropriate can mean almost anything. So for performance art, there are virtually no limits. But if you're designing a bridge, the bridge can't collapse. It can be the most pretty bridge in the world, and it collapses. It's not a creative bridge. So there are a couple of different ways that we even start thinking about it. Because creativity is one of those constructs that can be almost anything. And so one way is there's the 4 Ps, where we study the creative person. So for example, we look at what is the personality like of people who tend to be more creative. And as I'll discuss at the end, there are a few traits. What is the relationship, for example, between intelligence and creativity? What type of motivation makes people more or less creative? What goes into being a creative person? Other people study the actual process of being creative. And this is a lot of what Lamies is studying within engineering, she's going to talk about. But the actual way that we are creative, what we do, what are the steps, what's maybe going on in our brain. And this is particularly hard to study. I've always found this the hardest aspect because asking somebody to do something creative right in front of you and observing them is kind of like asking somebody to go to the bathroom in front of you. People just don't like doing that. So you end up either looking at what they've done or interviewing them and asking for their reflections and thoughts. And so this is particularly hard. There's a creative product, and this is the final produced thing, and it can be an idea, it can be a mathematical equation, a painting, a book, and there's a whole string stream of research that looks at how do we evaluate creative products. And one of these surprising findings is that people tend to agree on what's creative and what's not creative, much more than you might think. And finally, the creative press. And really what this means is a creative environment, but environment starts with E, so we use press because that has P. And that is, what are the things around you that can make you more or less creative? And so sometimes people study what are the things about the classroom. There are specific things that a teacher can do or not do that can make students more or less creative. Same thing in a workplace. There are ways that you can foster creativity or suppress creativity. Just as a quick example, things like rewards lower creativity. So if you have students and you say, I'm going to give prizes to the best essays, they will tend to be less creative than if you don't say anything. Another way of thinking about creativity is the 4 C's, and you'll notice we like to speak in letters. There's also a model of 5 A's and 4 G's that I will get into. And this looks at the level of creativity. Because people often lump creativity as one thing. But what exactly are we talking about? So this theory argues that it starts off with mini-C, which is pretty much in many ways the process of learning. And it's when you create in your minds metaphors, concepts to learn something new. And this may be something that has no interest to anybody else. So maybe it's your first time you're trying to write a poem. And it may be a terrible poem, but if it's meaningful to you, then there's some level at which that's creative. It's that initial spark. As you get feedback, as you practice and work, the next level is what we sometimes call little c, or everyday creativity. And this is the creativity that other people can appreciate and recognize, yes, this is creative. One analogy I like to think about it is that if you think about YouTube videos, mini-C are the random videos that people post thinking they're funny or clever, and nobody watches them, and if people do watch them by accident, they immediately click away. Little c are the videos you click on, and they're engaging enough that you watch the whole thing, and you enjoy it. It's that level of creativity. If you go to a county fair and you see little hand-carved bookshelves or birdhouses, things like that, it's this creativity that all of us can do, but it's at the next level. With practice comes pros, expert creativity. This is where it's not just that you would bother watching the YouTube video, but you would actually pay to download the song, or you would actually pay for the book. You would, and it not only means time to money, but there's a level of expertise, usually about 10 years. And it's this level that is the level that nearly everybody can aspire to, aim for, and many in this room either are at that level or will be in their domain. And finally is a big C, genius. This is where it just takes time. There are plenty of people who we would guess are big C today who will be forgotten in 50 years. Just as there are people today who we would guess would be forgotten who will oddly be remembered. And big C is that course of time. What do we remember from 100 years ago, 150 years ago? What writers are still read? What scientists' work is still important? And so the idea of saying, I want to be big C in my life, you have to live for a very long time. One of the biggest stereotypes about creativity is that it's just artistic. And all of the research indicates that this is not true. You can be creative in almost anything. There's everyday creativity. You can be creative as a cook. You can be creative, obviously, as a scientist, mathematician, engineer, almost any domain. And a lot of people will assume they're not creative because they're not artistic. And they're not the same thing. Measurement is kind of creativity's Achilles heel. So if we talk about IQ, whether or not you like them, there are a bunch of IQ tests. And they have thousands of studies that show that they measure something, whether or not you think it's important, but it's there. Same with the SATs, the GREs. You may hate them, I often do, but there's a reason why people use them. They measure something. Creativity measurement is a bit more spotty. The most common way is what's called divergent thinking. And what happens is you're asked an open-ended question. So how many uses can you think of for a brick? Is a very common question. Or what would happen if people could fly? Or here's this ambiguous photo. What's going on in the photo? Or here's a whole bunch of circles. Do something to them to make something different. Open-ended question. And then it's scored for fluency, which is sheer output. How many ideas do you think of that are somewhat relevant? Flexibility, which is the trickiest concept to me, which is the categories. So if you say, I could use a brick to as a baseball bat, as a cricket bat, as a hockey stick. Those are all three different ideas, but it's the same concept as a sports instrument. Or I could use a brick to hit somebody on the head with, to hit my dog in the head, to hit my cat in the head, have some issues with you. But again, these are all different ideas, but the same category. And then originality is how rare is your response. And if we ask 300 people to list uses for a brick, are you the only one to come up with your use? Or do you come up with the thing that everybody else says? The nice thing about divergent thinking and these tests is that there is a substantial amount of research on it. The bad part is that it's still pretty spotty, and they're very artificial. If you study, so to speak, to do better on a divergent thinking test, you won't be more creative. You'll just do better at that divergent thinking test. Another idea is the idea of association theory, which in other words, if you have a concept like cow, and then you have all these different associations that come to mind when I say the word cow, and you can almost trace these. And similar to what's the most original in divergent thinking, some responses are obvious, very close in distance. You can almost measure this linguistically. Other ones are farther away. And the idea behind this instrument is that you take three words that appear in that same cloud and have a fourth word behind it. So in this case, sleeping, bean, and trash. There is a fourth word that if you add to each of these words, it will form a consonant. Anybody know? Bag. Sleeping bag, bean bag, trash bag. And the good news about the rat is it's easy to give. The bad news is it's awfully reliant on vocabulary and intelligence. The other way is by having people do something creative and then having it rated. Having it rated by experts in the field or teachers, sometimes peers, sometimes yourself. this tends to be the most approximating what you would think of as actually creative work, but it's also the most time-consuming. So if creativity was ever to be part of any type of high-stakes testing, it couldn't be self-reported because people lie. And something like divergent thinking is very trainable. But then with something like this, where you'd have them actually do creative things, you'd have to have the resources to have people rate them. And if you have 3,000 or 10,000 applicants to something, it gets everybody. The question in creativity, I don't think we asked enough, is why creativity? The fact is, creativity takes up time, money, effort, resources. Any business place that says we want to really inspire creativity, if they actually want to do it, they actually have to give employees time to be creative. They have to allow and allocate resources for it. If you want to be more creative yourself, it takes time, it takes effort. It's not, people have this dream of creativity is this inspiration, this glorious muse, and it's not really true. Creativity is work. But there's a lot of research is indicating that it's work. Creative people tend to get promoted, get higher salaries, be more successful starting a business. They tend to be more satisfied with their careers. In life, creative people tend to be in better physical health, be more resilient, have less personal stress, be in better moods. And despite all of the research that you hear talk about creativity and mental illness, for the most people, creativity is associated with better well-being. And there are some negative things like some depression, but generally, creativity is associated with positive mental health, not negative. Now we're going to talk about creativity and engineering.
Research on engineering creativity actually has been, in the last half a century, there is a growing call for fostering creativity in engineering education, but still creativity is absent in most higher education institutions, and new graduates are emerging from universities lacking the skills in creativity and problem solving. So obviously there is a need for deeper understanding of the need of creativity and how we can foster creativity in engineering. And that's what my research actually aims to investigate. I would like to, which is actually something that I'm working on, to compare engineering students across different domains on some creative thinking skills, or what I'm going to talk about as the creative problem solving. We all know how problem solving is important in engineering. And studying that creative process, one of the keys that Dr. Kaufman talked about, the creative process, studying that process, actually theorists or creativity theorists came up with several different, related, of course, models of creative problem solving. And they found that creativity tends to happen in sequence of stages. So they proposed many models. I chose a 4-stage model for problem solving, which is the one that you can see. And I mainly chose this one because creativity scholars think that this is the main 4 steps that are needed in engineering creativity or for engineering creative problem solving. Another reason that I chose this one is actually because it maps very nicely to the 4 stages or 4 concepts that the new generation science standards emphasize when defining engineering design. They define engineering design as identifying the problems and generating solutions to these problems in terms of the success and constraints, and then evaluating them according to the criteria of success and constraints, and then choosing the best or optimal one to implement. So these, as you can see, they map very nicely to the creative problem solving. So the creative problem solving, the model that I chose of 4 stages, is what I'm gonna, or actually using in my study as a theoretical framework to compare engineering students across these stages. And if we want to talk about like these 4 stages, problem recognition is what you might guess, finding the problem or recognizing that there is a problem that needs a solution. And that's not always easy, you know, and like, again, it's not like in a test, I will give you the problem and then you will try to solve. But in real world situation where it's more open-ended, well-defined and specified, so you need to find the problem that needs a solution. And the research talk about also finding good problems. Good problems are the ones that you can solve for the given situation, and also that will give you or inspire you to give solutions that might be updated for future uses also. The second one is idea generation. Here comes the divergent thinking. You want to think about how many ideas you can generate as potential solutions. So you're thinking of also your problem that you have or you found in your first stage. And generating the ideas is not just brainstorming. It might be brainstorming, but it's also thinking of the criteria of success, thinking of the constraints that you have, because some ideas might not work for what you have in terms of money maybe, or time, or resources. And the third one is evaluating the ideas or idea evaluation. The research talk about constraints here. So here the problem solver will eliminate almost every idea they came up with, right? Except for one, which is the best idea that they're gonna pick as a solution that they're gonna be implementing. The last one is solution validation, which is actually, this one is connected to the first one. The problem solver will connect the idea that they picked as an optimal solution that they're gonna implement. They're going to connect it to the initial problem, making sure that it's going to solve the problem. So this will actually connect all the stages together. One of my research questions for my dissertation is to see if students across different engineering domains show different patterns of strength in creative problem solving skills, the one that we talked about, problem recognition, idea generation, idea evaluation, and solution validation. So my sample was like undergraduate students in different engineering disciplines. I gave them several sets of measures. One of them, actually, the one that was created for this study, is I gave a scenario. That scenario was created by a panel of engineering professors. Actually, several scenarios were created. And one of them was picked and then reviewed for clarity, for real-world application, and other criteria. And we ended up with this scenario that you can read maybe and think about as engineers. So the students were given this scenario, asked to read it carefully, think that you are the responsible engineer, and then answer these 4 questions. I'll let you read them. As you can tell, these 4 questions will lead them through the stages of creative problem solving. So the first one is asking to find a problem. They might find more than one problem, but find an engineering-related problem. Second one is asking to generate ideas, as many ideas as they can, as potential solutions. And then the third one is to evaluate the solutions and pick the optimal one, or the best solution. Number 4 is to give some ideas to implement this solution. Scoring my data is much more complicated than to be explained in an hour, even presentation. It is complicated, and I think I contacted some of you, and I'm still interested in more raters. If you are interested, we'll talk about this after the presentation. You can talk to me or email me. Experts in the fields, so obviously engineers or graduate students in engineering, rated my questions for quality. So they gave each question or each response of the participants for the quality of the response, either for question 1 or 2 or 4. Question 3 is a little special, has a special way of doing that. And then after scoring for quality, other raters, some of them are in engineering and some of them in education, and they work on creativity research. They rated the response of one participant to all the questions for overall creativity. And that is another way of measuring creativity in terms of a technique that we use in research, in creativity research, called the CAT, consensual assessment technique. So they would just use their own expertise, their own definition of creativity to grade the response of the student for creativity. And of course, I do the analysis to look at agreement of these several graders before I average that. So as I said, it's a little complicated. It's just like we can think of it as we're rating for quality, we're rating for creativity, and in addition to that, I'm rating for the divergent thinking that Dr. Kaufman explained earlier, flexibility, fluency, flexibility, and originality. And obviously, divergent thinking, I'm going to be using this for question number 2, but they generate the ideas. And I'm going to give an example. I'll give you an example of 2 responses from my data to question number 2 when they generate ideas that are potential solutions. So here is one student response. Now the left column is categories. That's like this is like the rating. The ideas that were generated by one student are here in the right column, and you can read them. So these are some of the solutions that that person came up with. And of course, you would think of the categories, like the ideas that were given by a student generated, each student or each participant generated that many ideas, and then the ideas, 2 graders actually work on all the ideas generated by all the participants. They put them under, they thought of categories that these ideas can go under, and then they met to agree on the categories. So we know the categories that we're going to put all the ideas under, and then each idea, these 2 graders work on each idea of each participant. So obviously several ideas for each participant, and put them under the category. So here is what I have after we put each idea for this student under one category. Now if I ask you, I want you to rate this response for fluency. How many ideas? Remember, fluency is how many ideas you have, right? How many ideas did that participant come up with? Ideas. The ideas are in the right one.
So they're all
Yes. So you can see 10 ideas, right? He came up with 10 different ideas. Solar energy is one, geothermal is another, wind power, insulate the farmhouse with modern fiberglass, and then so on. 10 of them. But if I ask you how many different categories this person came up with, and you can see that I actually rearranged them to show you that the first 3 go under one category, which is renewable energy, right? And the other 3 go under insulation, one way or another, using a different material or insulating the doors versus windows. And then the last 4 go under renovating something in the house. So how many different categories? 3, right? So for fluency, this person gets 10 points. For flexibility, gets 3, right? Yes?
Eliminate the subjectivity of these categories. For example, somebody else might come up with 4, right? There are
Somebody might
subcategories.
think that these are, yeah.
For example, doors and windows are really the same thing. Fiberglass is a little bit maybe different. That can go to renovate.
Yeah, this is what why I said I had 2 graders work separately on the ideas and decided what are the categories that they can think of, and then they met to talk about the categories, then they agreed upon like several categories, and then they went and put each idea under a category, and then they met to also to decide that yes, this is under that, this is under that. And also in research actually, I calculate the agreement between these 2, even though that they agree and they work on they agree on one, but there are 2 different assignments of categories also. I run that for agreement, and they agreed to more than 85% actually, which is very good. Anything over 0.8 is very good, but it's more than 85%, 0.85. That's a good question. That's the tricky part of storing my data, and especially with that many participants. Actually, I have 505 participants, so you can imagine each one with a couple of ideas, and it's fun. Another student came up with, as you can see, 5 different ideas. So if I ask you what is the fluency score for this participant? 5. How about flexibility? 5, right? So as you can see, if you want to compare these 2, I wanted just to give you a very tiny bit of how this is one way of comparing the students. So maybe one major, we don't know, maybe one major is better than the other in terms of flexibility, or the other is better than fluency. As you can see, the first student has a higher fluency score, where the second has higher flexibility score, right? So they're just different patterns of strength. And this is just comparing the divergent thinking, and of course I'm going to also do originality of each idea. That's the third concept or aspect of divergent thinking. And then I'll compare the qualities and the creativity. So I'm hoping that other than the creative problem solving measures or the differences across these stages. My study also will investigate relationship between these measures or these creative problem solving and some desired outcome, and beside the association between these and some differences in or individual differences like personality tests. Personality, we know in the research that it affects creativity, and I'm assuming that it will affect creative problem solving skills. So the association between personality and these stages, or creative problem solving or creative self-efficacy in these stages will be also studied, in addition to association between these stages and GPA, engagement, interest in engineering, and other outcomes that we care about in the educational system. I'm hoping that my finding will have implication for educational policy development, and it will give insights regarding the relationship between the stages of the creative skills and some other measures, such as personality, like I said, and maybe measure, and maybe the year of, or level of expertise, and some other ones, and potential relationship between them and some other academic outcomes. I hope again to, in light of my findings and learning theories, to provide some suggestions for better learning practices, and thereby equip future engineers with the necessary knowledge as well as creative skills. I'll let Dr. Kaufman talk about some general tips.
The question about divergent thinking also illustrates creativity measurement can be subjective. Even with the agreement, and this is great, everything is good, there is still that bit of slipperiness. Although it's built in a lot more than you might think into other standard measures. So in any individual IQ test, all the items are scored 0, 1, or 2. So if you're asked, what is a fork? There's a 2-point response, a 1-point response, and a 0-point response. And there's a lot of guidance, but ultimately the examiner has to decide, is it 1 or 2? So in a lot of ways, tests are kind of like sausages and laws, and that if you actually see what's underneath, it kind of scares you how much we accept the results. But there is this kind of slippery measurement in most soft constructs and measures. But some broad tips. Inspiration is overrated, which I've alluded to before. People tend to think in terms of lightning bolts. And it's one reason why every 6 months is a study about how people method desks are more creative, and everybody jumps on it. And it's not that that study is wrong, but these studies tend to be done with a sample size of 40, and they're never replicated because we want that to be the case. We wish that by painting the wall blue, it would be more creative, or with a messy desk, or a 10-minute hike in nature, these are all actual studies, that will be more creative. For better or worse, creativity is much more connected with knowledge of the domain, expertise, practice, all the kinds of things that are a lot less fun and sexy. Another way is that to think of your creativity as being valuable, not fixed. And they've done these same findings with intelligence. If you believe that you can become more creative, then you are more likely to persist in situations. If you believe you have a certain amount of creativity, you're more likely to give up when you fail. So, just believing, and of course the truth is somewhere in between, but focusing on the part that's flexible will help you be more creative. Within personality, the big personality factor most associated with creativity is openness to experience. And it represents two different things. One is your intellectual curiosity and interests, and the other is more of your experiential openness, so wanting to try new things. So openness to experience could mean wanting to go to an art museum, or it could be wanting to go bungee jump or try new types of food. They both represent that construct. And so again, openness to experience, trying new things, but also intellectual challenges, using imagination. And there's been very recent work that looks at the type of openness and what type of creativity is related to, and the more intellectual side of openness to experience, so wanting to debate or think about ideas, is more associated with scientific creativity, and the more wanting to jump off a cliff is more associated with arts creativity. So if you want to be creative in science, you don't have to worry about bungee jumping. And this incidentally, anybody know what that is? That is a right. It's a durian fruit. That was me trying to be open to experience in my talk to Singapore. The durian fruit is a delicacy. It's also very pungent. And it's the before and after taking the car. I'm about to try it, and sadly, just ran all over the ways life is going wrong. Another thing to think about is where motivation fits in. Not shockingly, people are more motivated to be creative when they are personally interested. As I mentioned before, rewards can reduce intrinsic motivation. If you are already wanting to do something and you get any type of reward for it, whether it's money or grades or extra credit, you slowly begin doing that thing for the rewards. There are times when we need to use rewards, because evaluation does the same thing. There are times we need to evaluate, but they come with a price. Passion, more creativity. Love what you do, which is such a horrible cliche, but actually borne out by some research. And we're happy to take questions or do whatever it is.
So I have two questions. One, you mentioned the reward system not necessarily. The rewarding. It seems to me that the entire education system is based on a reward system. So what's wrong with that? What should be done?
What should be done versus what is being done. Most of the way that everything is designed doesn't help. In an ideal world, there would be a continuum. The problem is that you need change. In essence, real change comes top down. And so there's been a handful of occasions where I've had superintendents who are interested in this. And me and I work with Ron together, who's also here. We met with superintendents who worked and actually get designing some stuff. If a teacher wants to do something, and there are many people who want to, they're often constrained. Teachers are often told you need to teach this on this day, this on this day, and these are the tests, and which often are linked to your income. And almost all of this stuff, the emphasis on testing, the emphasis on the right answer, the emphasis on grades and extra credit and all of this stuff, in general, hurts student creativity. One thing that Ron and I tend to push is this slight change, because nobody does big change. And there are a lot of ways within the system of slowly allowing for creativity. So for example, when we went to one of the schools, the superintendent cared about this, the original assignment was to be the teacher had 6 prompts that she was going to ask students to write about. And we suggested what if each student comes up with a prompt, and then other students can use those prompts to write about. A little bit of creativity in the creation of prompts. Another way is if a teacher wants to find out what the class knows, you can easily do a divergent thinking type of exercise or brainstorming where people toss out ideas and think of all the possible things within whatever you're teaching. So it's not a matter of having, creativity zone, but rather, okay, so if you're teaching history, or the gold rush, having the kids, even if it's a way to finding out what are their initial preconceptions, what would it have been like to be a gold rush miner in 1848? I'm from California, so we were the gold rush miner recently. Another way is having multiple types of assignments. So having some assignments that are the typical compare and contrast or solve the correct answer, but every so often slipping in one that allows a little more of design your own study or construct your own this. These things don't solve the problem, but they're the kind of little things that teachers can do at an individual level if they don't have a school system behind them, and most school systems don't. I mean, I think it's very, people criticize teachers, which I find annoying because most teachers are game, but creativity is something else. I think as creativity researchers, we need to demonstrate why it's important. Most creativity researchers study creativity because they like the concept. They're creative and yay. And I got my PhD, started working at Educational Testing Service, and my boss on my 3rd day of work said, okay, so why is this stuff important? We have yet to do good studies that show not that creativity is linked with these outcomes. We know that creativity is associated with positive outcomes, but that creativity is more associated with these positive outcomes than other good things. Should we spend time on creativity instead of building up leadership skills or resiliency? I don't know. I mean, I'd say yes, but I can be totally wrong because we don't have that data. If creativity really is important, then we need to have this studies that show, look, this is all the things that you could be spending class time on, and here's where creativity ranks. And it's more important than this, and therefore you should do it, and therefore convince more superintendents. We're not doing that. I'm trying. But,
The second question is about how creativity relates to solitude versus social interactions.
very domain specific. So within personality, it's called introverted extroversion. And probably let's say out of the average 10 studies, 3 find nothing, 5 find extroverted people more creative, and 2 find introverted people more creative. However, scientists and visual artists, for some reason, tend to be more introverted and more creative. Performers, much more extroverted. Usually also writers, usually also anybody in business or anything with invention type stuff. So a lot of it's domain specific.
So it actually seems to me it relates to that experience of it, because if you're a scientist, you can have that experience by yourself. If you're a performer, you need other people to create that experience.
I think that's part of it. I think it's a little bit chicken and the in that conversely, do we go into fields that match us? You know, I mean, as well as the concept of extroversion is still a kind of broad concept. So very recently, they've been trying to redefine personality, whereas it's traditionally a big five. There's extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, openness to experience, and neuroticism, or emotional stability, as it's called. Recently, we're trying to split each one of these big five into two different factors. And extroversion, there's one aspect that's about being gregarious and outgoing, and one that's more about being ambitious and almost aggressive. There have yet to be really studies looking at this new way of thinking about it. And so again, what aspect, I mean, I consider myself introverted, but I'm not nervous doing speeches. But there.
I had a question on the whole farmhouse example. Yeah,
Farmhouse, yes.
so when you gave that, so I noticed too, like some of the answers were, for example, like like a wind farm, for example, but that's assuming that I guess it presents like a limited budget or an unlimited budget. So have you ever like posed a question saying like, suppose then you have like $500 in your savings account too. So what would you do to save money? I'm just curious to see how that would change your approach.
Did I ask about that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so like right now, like it's kind of more open and say, what would you do to like safety? So what if you made it though, so like the person is even more restricted, so they only have like $500 in their savings account. Then how would that change how their creativity? Like would they say, oh, I'll go and ask my parents for some help, or would I go like?
In fact, I chose two examples where the students kind of gave answers that are engineering related, but some other people, in fact, they thought of conserving, making more money, moving. So it was made like actually it was left open on purpose because we wanted them to find a problem. And some people really like went that route. And some of them actually gave both. You know, engineering here you can repair this, you can check this, or you can find what your neighbors did. So it was open enough for some people, and I was actually even some of them are funny, like they went to the extreme. They were really creative. I don't know if we would, you know, they were original with ideas. I like personally like if we think of appropriateness, yeah, you can avoid that by moving or rebuilding the house. So that was actually the case, and that's a good question. I was going to mention that. I guess so I picked on purpose just because I wanted the responses or two of them actually that were more engineering related. But yeah, some of them went that way. Did I answer you? Yeah.
This, by the way, is also a cultural difference in the way people often approach this. In that, in more Western cultures, it tends to be emphasis on wildly original. In Eastern cultures, constraint is often seen as being able to work within constraints tends to be more highly valuable than creative. So there would have been some interesting nuances in terms of.
Yeah, and I'm interested to look to see if the differences was if the difference was actually that expertise. So year, 1 versus year 4. I'm interested also to look by the level of expertise. That might, I don't know, maybe you get more creative, you generate more creative ideas if you have more expertise in the field, or you go with whatever works better. Yes.
I'm curious, could you look into the creativity of procrastination? So obviously engineering, the end goal is you want to get a good product. So one thing to look at is what's the situation and try and whittle down, start those ideas from the output end to ideal solutions by now analyzing the problem to begin with the definition. So for example, are there animals that you own? What's the weather conditions? What's the geothermal conditions? both trying to define the premise must be creativity of what you're willing to look at, and then obviously once you define these as non-ideal solutions, you know, to look into how they define their problem.
So that is actually where, as I said, I will look at different aspects, like divergent thinking is one thing that I'm going to compare the students at. And one thing I remember talking about to one of my committee members about that we are really wondering, and he's like, he works on, he's an engineer, and he's in Australia, and he works on engineering creativity. So one thing that we wonder, is it really like they get creative with the ideas, and then once they pick the solution, they go with what works better? Or, you know, we don't know if creativity is more in generating the ideas, and you can be creative there, but then you think as an engineer, once you evaluate it, because you're an engineer and you want something to work and you want to implement this, and you're, the constraints and everything. So that is something that I will look into, and I would love to see if really working, through the stages will make engineers more creative or less creative. So that is really, an interesting question, and I'm looking for. Actually, I didn't start yet analyzing. I'm just organizing my data. As I said, storing and organizing takes a really long time in terms of my study. But I will definitely analyze all of these different aspects.
Not in engineering, but in general problem solving. And one of the findings is that experts spend much more time preparing than us. So to give them a task, the experts will read the manual, ask these questions, whereas the novices want to jump in and just start. So my and limited results indicate that's also linked to higher creativity overall. So that is that your hand?
Oh yeah. I had a couple questions. One was just, I think you kind of answered it right now, but one was sort of is there an influence of time on creativity? Because it seems like in your study, you're giving them the question, and then it's sort of on the spot they sort of have to think of the answers to the questions, and so it's kind of like you have sort of a limited time to really think of these sort of creative answers. But when actually approaching a problem, a lot of times there's a long time for you to sort of think about them, or you kind of think about stuff, and then a lot of times you put it back in your mind and you go on, and then later on you come back and reapproach it, and sometimes you think of a more creative thing, and maybe that's influenced from separating yourself from it, or it's influenced by, oh, you're doing something else, and then that triggered some other part of things, and you're kind of making a bunch of connections, and maybe you don't really know how buying a banana at the store is influencing how you're thinking of a solution to your eating problem, but in a sense there's a connection that happens there. So I just want to share if there's any studies that have been done on sort of the influence of time and maybe experiences between answers.
A lot of that, more of that work's done in business. Actually, 100% true. But and actually somebody here, Alnazzal, looks at not specifically time, but an incubation, which is this whole
One stage of
one problem. And even in this case, part of it is the difference between lab work and real life. And in a sense, anything you do in a lab or online is limited. So that as much as I love the conceptual assessment technique is, hey, you can write a poem, but in fact, usually it's people writing poems and they have 3 minutes to do it, they're doing it for extra credit. There have been some very recent work that's looked at stuff that's been uploaded to websites, like the people, a t-shirt company, people would upload the designs and they get voted on, and this is actual work that people do and studying that as a product. But the problem is then they don't know the process. They haven't been, they only see the final product, but it's a real product as opposed to something manufactured and studying. And I know people who are just starting to do this.
Has there ever been like sort of like a long-term study, sort of, maybe you give freshmen maybe this question, and then you gave those same freshmen this question 3 months later, or, you know, a year
I'm
later?
aware of, there was one study where a guy somehow got permission to stay in a science lab for 10 months and observe for 10 months, and what he found is generally consistent with the type of stuff. There's a lot of creative process stuff, some mechanics in that. There aren't very many longitudinal studies in creativity like that. The closest we have is when we know these people were tested in 1983, and we then track them down 30 years later, which is totally different.
Initially, I thought about this in work. Initially, I thought about giving them a problem at the beginning of one semester, like fall semester, and then giving them another problem at the end of the semester. But because I want to graduate,
Yeah.
so, but actually there was giving the survey, because we were thinking about this, so Dr. Kaufman suggested that in my survey, I put like a time, like I know if I want to look at people who took more time than others, because that was online. Again, so they're like, I think I have too much data, which is good, and I can look into that, and that is, yeah, like, but with research, we have to, like, sometimes we're, constraints, problem solving. I want to do this in the time given, so I can look at this maybe in the future, yeah.
Sometimes you just need to limit your scope so you can
Yes,
accomplish,
yeah.
what
Yes,
you're
that's
setting
true.
out to do. rather
Yeah.
than going
And you have to be creative about that. You know how to be creative about that. But yeah, you have to limit yourself sometimes.
And so we have time for one more question. One.
And I was like, sure.
The question I guess, so creativity itself is always kind of an abstract concept, right? So I guess my question would be, in your own opinions, what is the most limiting factor to creativity? What makes the most difficult thing to be creative? Or what aspect of creativity is the hardest to sort of develop and become better in?
I think one of the hardest things to study, how much can you actually learn? And the kind of long-term studies that we have in intelligence, we don't have in creativity, in terms of really, there are a lot of studies within intelligence and personality where they would get people to come back every 3 or 4 years. And you can really see this kind of, not quite the same thing, it's not the same problem. You can trace, and is the 7-year-old kid who's like this, what will they be like at 50? We don't really know that. I mean, we have studied, we have people who are trying to answer that, but that basic knowledge of, how much of it is that spark that you have, and how much of it is hard work and perspiration, how much is the interaction, how much can people improve? Can you get somebody to go from B, C, to Pro C just based on practice and hard work? I think so. That's also me kind of making stuff. Other thing is there is no really issue with creativity because there's no IQ tests. It takes millions of dollars for every single major IQ test. And they do a subtests, and they went down to 8, and they start out with 100 items per subtest, and they went down to less than 10, and they have norms for all levels. It's just, it's been costing billions of dollars in it, because every school district in America buys IQ tests. They tend to buy the same one, but there's money in it, and so business has a reason for wanting to pour money into IQ tests. There isn't that demand for creativity. I think it would be relatively easy to build a creativity assessment, a la an IQ assessment, that would give a full score with different abilities, the same area, different intellectual abilities. You could develop a profile of that. I think eventually you can do it so that you score by computer. You can do it online. But it would take money. And wanting some billionaire to make creativity their cause. But that lack of assessment, in fact, the creativity assessments tend not to correlate. Just for analyzing data on a study of reading, people come in Monday, Wednesday, and Friday the same week, do alternate versions of the test. So you did 300 thinking tests Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and it's not measuring the same consistently. And we're just writing it up. That's all I do. But when the measurement of the construct is so flawed, it's very hard to get to that next level.
I don't know if that was the answer. Or you were asking also what is the hardest or what is the hardest to improve your own creativity?
Right, or so for like the example that you were showing, like there was, in terms of responsibility versus like, all right, so.
Fluency.
Right, for fluency. And so between fluency and flexibility, is the one that, while say maybe fluency is easier to come up with lots of different ideas, it's harder to have those on different topics, or is it, like sort of, how hard is it to think outside the box if you don't?
That's one reason why I'm studying this is I'm hoping that I can find some differences why measure or why year maybe this measure is like they are better at generating the ideas, and that way maybe student or individuals with that, like if we know what skill of creativity will work better for mechanical engineers rather than electrical engineers, that's where like I'm trying to go that way, and I'm very sure that I'm going to continue studying this. So if we know what type, it's not like creativity, it's not like the same in each domain like Dr. Kaufman mentioned, or in every culture. So if we know some type of the differences, we can maybe know what the skills that we have to foster better in this major versus the other, and maybe then that will attract people who know that they're good at these skills. They can go to this domain or this major. I'm hoping that I will have some type of statistically significant finding that will inform us more of that in engineering education specifically.
In general, if you practice any of these, you'll get better. So if you do a bunch of fluency exercises, your fluency scores will go up. The problem is it won't transfer. So in other words, if you practice your divergent thinking, you'll get better at divergent thinking. But it doesn't mean to be more creative engineer. You'll just be better at divergent thinking. Training and practice works best with it.
Thank you so much.
Alright, again, I want to thank you all for joining us today. Special thanks to Dr. Kaufman and Lamies for this fantastic talk. We're gonna put out the information for the next event, the next workshop, and please.
Gonna say it quickly just so you have an idea. March 11th is our next graduate professional development workshop. It's on flourishing in a new work environment, if I have the title right. So March 11th, Wednesday, the same room here. March 12th, we have a coffee hour. March 13th, we have a board meeting. And Between now and then, we're trying to organize a social event similar to the bar night that we had, as more of an informal, night to get together, and relax and network and socialize with each other. But information on that's going to be posted soon. Keep an eye out, please. We haven't really organized it yet, but we're trying to get something organized between now and March 11th.
Thanks, please.